Hey guys, welcome back. Before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, please comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is. It is always interesting to hear of the whereabouts of our viewers. Now, let's begin. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into the rise and fall of Rome, but not in the way you remember from history class. The story of Rome doesn't begin with grand marble palaces, nor with legions marching in perfect synchronized formation beneath golden eagles. No, it starts much, much smaller, shrouded in the mists of legend and wrapped in the fabric of myth, a tale as old as the very hills upon which the city would rise. Picture this: two infant twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned to the harsh wilderness, left to the mercy of fate. But destiny, it seems, had other plans. They were miraculously discovered and suckled by a she-wolf, a primal symbol of fierce survival and untamed strength, deep within a cave on the Palatine Hill. This isn't just a charming bedtime story. It's the very genesis of the Roman spirit, embodying their ferocity, resilience, and a deep connection to the land. This foundational myth, steeped in violence and primal power, wasn't just a whimsical tale. It was a powerful narrative that Romans told themselves, a story that shaped their understanding of their own unique identity. It suggested a people forged in hardship, chosen by the gods, and destined for greatness, even if that greatness came at a cost. The twins, once grown into strong young men, vibrant with ambition, decided to found a city. But brothers, as history often reminds us, can have their fierce squabbles. A bitter disagreement over whose city it would be, and precisely where its sacred boundaries would lie, Romulus favoring the defensible Palatine Hill, Remus the equally strategic Aventine, escalated into a tragic, fratricidal confrontation. In a moment of rage or perhaps cold calculation, Romulus killed Remus. And so in 753 BC, according to tradition, Romulus ritually founded his city on the Palatine Hill, ploughing a sacred furrow around its perimeter, establishing the pomerium, the hallowed boundary. This act wasn't just practical, it was deeply religious, marking the nascent city as a place set apart, protected by the gods. Early Rome was a far cry from the magnificent, sprawling metropolis we often envision. It was a rough-and-tumble collection of simple huts, a fiercely independent settlement constantly vying for survival and dominance against its more established and often aggressive neighbors. To the north, the sophisticated Etruscans, masters of metalwork and urban planning, cast a long shadow. To the south and east, various Latin tribes and the fierce Sabines posed constant threats and challenges. For its first few centuries, roughly from 753 BC to 509 BC, Rome was ruled by kings. The historical details of this period, known as the Roman Kingdom, are hazy, often blending with oral tradition and later legendary embellishment. However, tradition speaks of 7 kings, each contributing, for better or worse, to the nascent city's development and laying foundational elements for its future greatness. Numa Pompilius, the second king, is a figure of profound significance in Roman religion. He is credited with establishing many of Rome's fundamental religious customs and institutions, including the various priestly colleges like the Vestal Virgins and the Pontifex Maximus, and setting the annual calendar of festivals. This laid the groundwork for the deep religiosity and superstition that characterized Roman society, where omens and divine will played a crucial role in public and private life. Later kings, like Ancus Marcius, expanded Rome's territory and founded the port of Ostia. Servius Tullius, another legendary figure, is said to have organized the Roman populace into social classes based on wealth and military capacity, fundamentally reshaping the army and establishing the centuriate assembly, a powerful political body. This system, where wealthier citizens had more votes, ensured that those who contributed most to the army also held the most political sway, a clever way to link military service to civic participation and maintain social order. But the story of kingship in Rome ends not with a whimper, but with a dramatic, furious rebellion led by the Roman aristocracy against a tyrant whose name would forever become synonymous with oppressive rule. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin, the Proud. His very name, Superbus, meaning arrogant or proud, tells you a lot about his character. Tarquin was depicted by later Roman historians like Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus as an absolute monarch who disregarded traditional customs, abused his power, and acted with tyrannical cruelty, undermining the rights and liberties of both the Roman people and the aristocratic Senate. His oppressive reign, marked by violence and fear, reached a breaking point, not with a grand battle or a political coup, but with a deeply personal tragedy that resonated throughout Roman society, sparking outrage and galvanizing action. The story, a cornerstone of Roman identity, tells of Tarquin's son, Sextus Tarquinius, committing a grave and unforgivable act of injustice against Lucretia, a virtuous, noble, and deeply respected Roman matron. Her subsequent suicide in the face of such profound dishonor and shame, a public act of defiance and despair against the tyranny. This traumatic event, culminating in the expulsion of Tarquin the Proud in 509 BC, marked an irreversible and profoundly significant turning point in Roman history, the birth of the Roman Republic. The Romans, utterly fed up with the abuses of absolute power and the arbitrary, unchecked rule of kings, made a solemn, almost sacred vow. They would never again allow a single person to hold such concentrated, unchecked authority. The very word rex, king, became anathema, a curse word in Roman political discourse, something to be reviled and avoided at all costs. This deep-seated aversion to monarchy would shape Roman politics, institutions, and the collective psyche for centuries to come, influencing their domestic policies and their interactions with other kingdoms and empires. The Republic was governed by an intricate, sometimes unwieldy, but remarkably resilient and innovative system of laws and institutions designed above all to prevent any one person or group from accumulating too much power. A complex system of checks and balances. At its heart were the consuls, two annually elected officials who served for 1 year at a time. They held supreme civil and military authority, known as imperium, making them essentially co-presidents and commanders-in-chief of the Roman armies. Their dual nature was a brilliant built-in check. If one consul proposed something, the other possessed the power to veto it, ensuring a degree of deliberation, preventing hasty or tyrannical decisions, and forcing compromise. This ensured that no single individual could seize absolute control. Each consul had their own distinct sphere of authority, and they alternated months in charge of the city. Then there was the Senate, arguably the most powerful and enduring institution of the Republic, and indeed of the entire Roman state. It was a council composed of elder statesmen, typically former magistrates who had already held significant public office. They served for life, accumulating vast experience, prestige, and wisdom. While not technically a legislative body in the early Republic, their authority was immense. They advised the consuls, controlled the treasury, oversaw foreign policy, managed religious affairs, and approved or disapproved of major building projects and declarations of war. Their recommendations, known as senatus consulta, were almost always followed due to their collective experience, immense prestige, and unparalleled influence derived from their aristocratic lineage and successful careers. They were the steady, guiding hand of Roman governance, representing continuity and tradition. But Rome wasn't just run by a small aristocratic elite. The ordinary citizens, known as plebeians, comprised the vast majority of the population and, crucially, formed the backbone of the Roman army. For a long time, though, political power and social status were heavily concentrated in the hands of the wealthy, landowning aristocratic families, the patricians, who claimed descent from the original Roman senators. This stark division between patricians and plebeians, a social and political struggle often referred to as the conflict of the orders, would be a defining and often tumultuous feature of the early and middle republic, a constant source of tension, unrest, and demands for reform. The plebeians, despite their essential role in Rome's military defense and economy, felt excluded from political power, denied access to high office, and subject to arbitrary patrician rule and harsh debt laws. They often protested, sometimes refusing military service, a critical bargaining chip. Through this ongoing, often bitter but ultimately remarkably non-violent struggle, at least initially, the plebeians gradually, painstakingly gained more rights and a greater voice in government. They leveraged their indispensable role in the army to exert pressure on the patrician elite. A pivotal victory came with the establishment of their own elected representatives, the tribunes of the plebs, around 494 BC. These tribunes possessed sacrosanctitas, meaning their persons were inviolable. Harming a tribune was a religious offense punishable by death. Crucially, they possessed the immense power of veto, Latin for I forbid, over any law or action by a magistrate that they deemed harmful to the common people. This was a monumental victory, giving the plebeians a direct voice and a powerful defense against aristocratic abuses. They also fought for and achieved the codification of Roman law in the 12 Tables around 450 BC, a groundbreaking step. These were a set of written laws publicly displayed in the Roman Forum, making the law accessible to everyone. This was crucial because it meant that law was no longer solely based on patrician interpretation or unwritten custom. Everyone, not just the elite, knew their rights and obligations, ensuring a degree of transparency, accountability, and legal predictability. This move alone significantly curbed arbitrary aristocratic power. Over the centuries, various other laws were passed that gradually opened up all magistracies, including the consulship, to plebeians, culminating in the Lex Hortensia in 287 BC, which made all laws passed by the plebeian assembly, concilium plebis, binding on all Romans, patricians included. This gradual evolution of Roman law and governance, often messy, sometimes contentious, but ultimately remarkably adaptable and resilient, demonstrated Rome's unique ability to incorporate diverse elements and gradually expand participation within its system, building a stronger, more unified state. As the Republic matured and gradually resolved its internal social struggles, Rome began its long, inexorable process of expansion. Slowly at first, then with accelerating momentum. This wasn't always a grand, premeditated plan of imperial conquest. It was often a result of defending itself from aggressive neighbors, intervening in local disputes among Italian city-states to protect its allies or strategic interests, or securing vital trade routes. The early Romans were characterized by an almost unmatched toughness, unwavering resilience, and an incredibly disciplined, pragmatic approach to warfare. They developed an effective, highly adaptable, and supremely formidable military system centered around the legion. The legion, comprising roughly 4,200 to 6,000 heavily armed infantrymen, was a flexible and versatile unit. It was meticulously organized into cohorts, then into centuries, allowing for complex maneuvers, strategic flexibility, and remarkable discipline on the battlefield. Roman soldiers were not just trained in combat, they were also superb engineers, capable of building roads, bridges, siege works, and fortified camps with astonishing speed and efficiency, turning every campaign into an exercise in infrastructure development. Their loyalty, while often to their immediate commanders, was ultimately to the Republic, to Rome itself, a deep-seated patriotism that drove their remarkable feats. With each hard-won victory, Rome gained more land, more resources, and more people. But they didn't just conquer, they brilliantly assimilated. Conquered peoples, particularly within Italy, were sometimes granted Roman citizenship, or at least the valuable rights of allies, known as socii, Latin for allies. This meant they could retain some local autonomy and cultural practices, manage their own internal affairs, but were obligated to provide troops for Rome's burgeoning army and adhere to Roman foreign policy. This shrewd policy of integration, rather than outright oppression and perpetual subjugation, was a key factor in Rome's early and sustained success. It created a vast, robust network of loyalty, shared interests, and military manpower that allowed Rome to project its power across the Italian peninsula with an unmatched scale and efficiency. By the mid-3rd century BC, Rome had become the undisputed dominant power in Italy, a force to be reckoned with. consolidating its control from the Alps in the north to the toe of Italy in the south, a testament to centuries of relentless expansion and shrewd diplomacy. But across the shimmering expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, a formidable maritime rival was rising, poised to challenge Rome's burgeoning power: Carthage. This powerful city-state, originally founded by Phoenician traders and located on the coast of modern-day Tunisia, was an economic and commercial powerhouse. It boasted a vast trading network that stretched across the entire western Mediterranean, controlling vital sea lanes and ports. It possessed a formidable navy that protected its shipping lanes, ensuring its prosperity, and a highly skilled merchant class that brought immense wealth to the city's coffers. Carthage and Rome were both expanding, their respective spheres of influence inevitably clashing over control of the rich trade routes and strategic islands like Sicily. This collision of ambitious, rising powers set the stage for a series of epic, brutal conflicts that would define the destiny of the Mediterranean world for over a century: the Punic Wars. These wars were not just territorial disputes. They were a clash of civilizations, a fight for ultimate supremacy in the Western world. The First Punic War, 264–241 BC, was primarily a naval conflict, a desperate struggle for control of Sicily, a strategically vital island situated squarely between the Italian mainland and North Africa. Rome, primarily a land-based power with little naval tradition or experience, found itself at a severe disadvantage. Yet with characteristic Roman determination, they undertook the immense task of building a navy almost from scratch, learning through bitter experience, crushing defeats, and heavy losses to storms in Carthaginian fleets. They famously copied a captured Carthaginian quinquereme, a large warship design, and, in a stroke of military innovation, invented a clever boarding device called the corvus, meaning raven in Latin, a rotating gangplank with a heavy spike that allowed their legionaries to board enemy ships, effectively turning naval battles into land battles where the Roman infantry could utilize their superior training and fighting skills. After years of brutal, grinding attrition, marked by massive ship losses on both sides due to both combat and devastating storms, Rome eventually emerged victorious. They secured control of Sicily, which became their first overseas province, and established themselves as a significant, albeit still learning, naval power, ready for the next, even greater challenge. The real existential challenge, however, came with the Second Punic War, 218–201 BC, a conflict that would etch itself into Roman memory and forge their national character. This was the War of Hannibal Barca, arguably one of the greatest military commanders in history, whose strategic brilliance continues to be studied today. A Carthaginian general of unparalleled genius and cunning, Hannibal was driven by a deep-seated, almost ancestral hatred for Rome, a vow instilled in him by his father Hamilcar Barca. He orchestrated one of the most audacious and seemingly impossible military feats in recorded history. He led his army, complete with a contingent of fearsome war elephants, across the treacherous Pyrenees Mountains, through southern Gaul, and then over the towering snow-capped Alps to invade Italy from the north. This was an act of sheer audacity, a combination of tactical genius and logistical nightmare, pushing his forces and animals to their absolute limits in freezing conditions. For 16 long, terrifying years, he roamed the Italian countryside, seemingly unstoppable, inflicting crushing defeats on the Romans at battles like Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and most famously, the catastrophic Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. At Cannae, Hannibal, with a numerically inferior force, brilliantly encircled and annihilated a much larger Roman army, using a tactical envelopment strategy that is still considered a masterpiece of military planning. It was a national catastrophe for Rome, a wound that went deep, costing them tens of thousands of lives in a single day and plunging the Republic into despair and near collapse. But the Romans, with their almost supernatural resilience, their stubborn refusal to surrender, and their deep, unwavering patriotism, endured. They adopted a cunning Fabian strategy of attrition, named after the dictator Quintus Fabius Maximus, who advocated avoiding pitched battles against Hannibal, while gradually eroding his strength by harassing his foraging parties, cutting off his supplies, and engaging in small-scale skirmishes. This was unpopular with the Roman people, who wanted decisive action, but it saved Rome from further catastrophic defeats. Simultaneously, they found their own brilliant general in Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, a young man who, despite facing initial setbacks, possessed a strategic vision and audacity rivaling Hannibal's. Scipio studied Hannibal's tactics, learned from them, and then dared to outmaneuver his formidable opponent. Instead of continuing to fight Hannibal directly on Italian soil, Scipio took the war to Carthage itself, invading North Africa. This bold strategic move forced Hannibal, after years of campaigning in Italy, to return home to defend his beleaguered city, leading to the final decisive showdown at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. There, Scipio, employing clever tactics that countered Hannibal's own, and using a combined Roman-Numidian cavalry, decisively defeated the legendary Carthaginian general. The Second Punic War solidified Rome's undisputed dominance in the Western Mediterranean, eliminating its most formidable rival and establishing Rome as the paramount superpower of its time. Carthage was forced to pay a massive war indemnity, surrender its entire navy, and lost its independent foreign policy, effectively becoming a Roman client state, its power utterly broken. Decades later, driven by enduring fear and resentment, exemplified by Cato the Elder's relentless cry, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed, Rome would finally destroy Carthage in the brief and brutal Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, leveling the city and sowing salt into its fields, a grim testament to Roman thoroughness and their unwavering determination to eliminate any potential future threat. As the dust settled from the final decisive victory over Carthage at Zama, Rome stood alone, an undisputed colossus bestriding the Western Mediterranean. The Punic Wars had been existential struggles, forging the Roman people in the crucible of unimaginable hardship and revealing their almost supernatural resilience. But with no major rival left in the West, Rome's gaze, like an eagle scanning new horizons, turned inexorably eastward. This was a realm teeming with ancient, sophisticated Hellenistic kingdoms, the successors to Alexander the Great's vast empire, rich in wealth, culture, and strategic importance. These weren't rough barbarian tribes, but highly organized states, often squabbling amongst themselves, providing Rome with ample opportunity to intervene, supposedly as a liberator. The Roman expansion into the east was a complex tapestry woven from opportunistic diplomacy, military might, and a burgeoning desire for wealth and prestige. Rome initially presented itself as a protector of Greek city-states against the aggression of the Macedonian kings, particularly Philip V and later Perseus. These interventions, beginning in the late 3rd century BC, escalated into full-scale wars. The Battle of Cynocephalae in 197 BC saw the Roman legions, with their flexible manipular system, decisively defeat the Macedonian phalanx, a formation once considered invincible. This was a triumph of Roman adaptability over rigid traditional warfare. It led to the liberation of Greece, a declaration made with great fanfare at the Isthmian Games. But this freedom quickly became a subtle form of Roman dominance, with Greek cities often finding themselves caught between Roman dictates and their own traditions. However, Macedonian ambition wasn't entirely quelled. Another Macedonian war followed, culminating in the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC, where Lucius Aemilius Paulus inflicted a crushing defeat on King Perseus. This marked the definitive end of Macedonian independence. Not long after, in 146 BC, Rome brutally demonstrated its power and intolerance for resistance by completely destroying the city of Corinth. This historic Greek city, a center of commerce and culture, was razed to the ground, its inhabitants killed or enslaved, as a terrifying message to any who might defy Rome. This same year, as you recall, Carthage was also utterly destroyed. It was a year that proclaimed to the world Rome had arrived, and its power was absolute. Further east, Rome also engaged with the Seleucid Empire in Syria, another vast Hellenistic kingdom. After a significant victory at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BC, Rome imposed harsh terms, stripping the Seleucids of much of their territory in Asia Minor and effectively crippling their power. Eventually, as these client states proved unreliable or their rulers died without heirs, more and more territory was directly annexed, forming new rich provinces like Asia, modern-day Western Turkey, and later Bithynia and Syria. Egypt, the last great Hellenistic kingdom under the Ptolemies, remained nominally independent for a time, but its wealth and strategic position made it an irresistible target, eventually falling under Roman sway during the civil wars of the late Republic. The immense influx of wealth, resources, and especially enslaved people from these conquered territories profoundly reshaped Roman society, creating an era of unparalleled prosperity for some, but also sowing the insidious seeds of profound social and economic disruption. Rome became the ultimate magnet, drawing in the riches of the world. Gold, silver, works of art, exotic goods, and vast numbers of captives poured into the city. The ruling elite, the senators and equestrians, grew fabulously wealthy from military plunder, lucrative provincial governorships, and massive land acquisitions. Luxurious villas sprang up around Rome and in the countryside, adorned with Greek sculptures and filled with enslaved musicians, artists, and scholars. For the first time, Roman tastes began to be heavily influenced by Greek culture, with Roman aristocrats adopting Greek philosophy, rhetoric, and artistic styles. However, this newfound wealth was far from evenly distributed. In fact, it dramatically exacerbated the existing inequalities, creating an ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor, a chasm that would ultimately threaten the very stability of the Republic. The backbone of the traditional Roman army had always been the small, independent farmer, the citizen soldier who owned his land and fought for his community. But the continuous, grinding military campaigns of conquest, especially the long wars in Spain and the East, kept these citizen farmers away from their land for years, even decades at a time. While they were away fighting Rome's battles, their farms fell into disrepair, their families struggled, and they accumulated debt. Upon their return, often exhausted and injured, many found their small plots of land neglected, unworkable, or even illegally seized by wealthy opportunists. They simply could not compete with the massive latifundia, huge agricultural estates owned by the super-rich elite, worked by thousands of cheap, disposable enslaved laborers, often war captives. These vast estates could produce wine, olives, and grain on an industrial scale, driving down prices and making it impossible for small farmers to survive. Faced with ruin, these displaced farmers, the very men who had won Rome's empire, were forced to sell their land and migrate en masse to the cities, particularly to Rome itself. This influx of impoverished, landless citizens swollen the ranks of the urban poor, forming a massive, discontented, and politically volatile demographic. They lived in crowded, ramshackle, multi-story apartment buildings, often without proper sanitation or safety, relying on meager casual labor or, increasingly, on the handouts from the state. This burgeoning urban proletariat, often unemployed and easily swayed by promises, became a powerful, unpredictable force in Roman politics. They were a ready audience for ambitious politicians who promised them land, grain, or entertainment. This led to a stark division in Roman society. On one side, the immensely wealthy elite, the optimates, literally the best ones, who sought to maintain the traditional power of the Senate and their own privileges. On the other, the populares, literally the popular ones, ambitious politicians who sought support from the common people by advocating for reforms, often appealing directly to the assemblies rather than working through the Senate. This growing social tension and class conflict simmered beneath the surface, occasionally erupting into violent riots and political unrest, threatening the cherished stability of the Republic. It was into this volatile atmosphere that the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, emerged as figures of immense historical significance and tragic consequence. They were scions of one of Rome's most distinguished aristocratic families, their mother Cornelia Africana being the daughter of Scipio Africanus, the hero of the Second Punic War. Despite their patrician background, they championed the cause of the plebeians, driven by a genuine concern for Rome's future, recognizing that a state reliant on a landless poor and a dwindling citizen soldier class was fundamentally unsustainable. Tiberius Gracchus, elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BC, famously proposed radical land reforms. His central idea was to reactivate and enforce an old law limiting the amount of public land any one individual could hold, aiming to redistribute excess land to the impoverished, landless citizens and military veterans. He argued that Rome's strength lay in its independent farmers and that this crisis threatened the very foundation of the Republic. This proposal, while popular with the masses, was met with furious, unwavering opposition from the powerful, land-owning senatorial elite, who saw it as an attack on their property rights and a dangerous precedent of appealing directly to the people, bypassing senatorial authority. When another tribune, Octavius, allied with the Senate, vetoed Tiberius's proposal, Tiberius, in an unprecedented and legally questionable move, had Octavius deposed by popular vote. He then passed his landlord directly through the popular assembly. This act, while perhaps well-intentioned, shattered the traditional norms of Republican politics, setting a dangerous precedent for bypassing the Senate and undermining the sacred inviolability of a tribune. It was a clear sign that the old rules of the game were breaking down. His reforms continued to stir controversy. When Tiberius sought re-election as tribune for a second consecutive term, another unprecedented move seen as an attempt to establish a tyrannical hold on power, the Senate, convinced he was aiming for kingship, took drastic action. On an election day in 133 BC, a mob of senators and their armed clients, led by the Pontifex Maximus, Scipio Nasica, confronted Tiberius and his supporters. What followed was a brutal, bloody street brawl. Tiberius Gracchus and hundreds of his followers were clubbed to death and their bodies thrown into the Tiber River. This violent act, the first significant instance of political bloodshed in Roman history, set a grim and terrifying precedent. Political disagreements could now be resolved not through debate and law, but through mob violence and murder. The sanctity of the tribune's office was shattered, and the Republic, which prided itself on its legal processes, succumbed to brute force. A decade later, Tiberius's younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, followed in his footsteps, elected tribune of the plebs in 123 BC and again in 122 BC. Gaius was even more ambitious, charismatic, and far-reaching in his reform proposals. He aimed to build a broad coalition of support, not just among the urban poor, but also among the wealthy equestrian class. His reforms included state-subsidized grain for the urban poor, a measure to alleviate hunger and cement popular support, laws to protect soldiers, a proposal for Roman colonies overseas to resettle the landless, and perhaps most controversially, measures to extend Roman citizenship or Latin rights to Rome's Italian allies. This last proposal was deeply unpopular with the Roman populace, who jealously guarded their citizenship. He also made efforts to weaken the Senate's power and reform the justice system. Like his brother, Gaius met a tragic and violent end. The Senate, alarmed by his growing power and radical proposals, particularly the citizenship bill, issued a Senatus Consultum Ultimum Scu Madlis, the final decree of the Senate, effectively declaring a state of emergency and authorizing the consuls to see to it that the Republic suffer no harm. This decree was a thinly veiled license to use lethal force against citizens without trial, a further erosion of Republican legal norms. In 121 BC, armed clashes erupted. Gaius Gracchus and thousands of his followers were cornered and killed on the Aventine Hill. His head was brought to the Senate, reportedly for a bounty in gold. The deaths of the Gracchi brothers marked a catastrophic turning point. They revealed the deep fissures in Roman society and, more chillingly, established a terrifying new norm. Political disagreements could now be resolved with murder, extra-legal violence, and mass executions. The rule of law was increasingly being replaced by the brutal rule of the sword and the mob. The seeds of civil war were being deeply sown. The brutal, bloody legacy of the Gracchi laid the groundwork for the next, even more destructive phase of Republican decline, the rise of powerful, militarized factions, led by ambitious generals. This era was epitomized by the fierce rivalry between Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, two figures whose actions would permanently alter the nature of the Roman army and irrevocably damage the Republic's institutions. Gaius Marius was a new man, novus homo, meaning he was the first in his family to achieve senatorial rank and the consulship, rising through sheer military ability and political shrewdness, rather than aristocratic birth. He became a hero after his victories against Jugurtha in North Africa and, more significantly, against the invading Germanic tribes, the Cimbrian Teutones, in the late 2nd century BC. His most lasting and profoundly impactful legacy, however, was his military reforms. Faced with a dwindling pool of landowning citizens eligible for military service, Marius ingeniously opened up the army to the landless poor. He promised them pay, equipment provided by the state, and crucially, land grants upon honorable discharge, a tangible reward for their service. This transformed the Roman army from a citizen militia into a truly professional standing force of career soldiers. While this made the army more effective and provided an outlet for the urban poor, it also had a devastating, unintended consequence. The soldiers' loyalty shifted from the abstract idea of the Republic to the charismatic, victorious commanders who could best ensure their pay, their welfare, and their retirement benefits. Generals now commanded personal armies, bound to them by oaths and patronage, rather than by a purely civic duty to the state. This made ambitious generals dangerously powerful political players. Marius's success and popularity led him to an unprecedented 7 consulships, a clear violation of republican norms designed to prevent one person from holding too much power. This fueled intense resentment among the conservative senatorial elite, setting him on a collision course with Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla, by contrast, was a patrician aristocrat, a brilliant general, but also a ruthless and deeply conservative figure, determined to restore the Senate's traditional authority and curb the power of popular assemblies and ambitious military commanders. Their rivalry first flared during the Social War 91 to 88 BC, a brutal conflict between Rome and its Italian allies, the Socii, who demanded full Roman citizenship. Both Marius and Sulla distinguished themselves in this war. The real breakdown occurred when the Senate appointed Sulla to command the war against Mithridates VI of Pontus in the east. However, Marius, through political maneuvering and leveraging his popular support, had the command transferred to himself. Sulla, outraged by this blatant disregard for senatorial authority and his own command, made an unprecedented and utterly shocking move in 88 BC. He marched his army on Rome itself, an act of unimaginable sacrilege against the Republic. He briefly seized the city, forced Marius to flee, and restored his command. But as soon as Sulla departed for the east to fight Mithridates, Marius and his allies returned to Rome, unleashing a brutal counter-purge against Sulla's supporters. When Sulla eventually returned victorious from the east in 82 BC, he marched on Rome again, this time with even greater determination and ruthlessness. He crushed his opponents, seized absolute power, and had himself declared dictator for the restoration of the Republic. This was a dictatorship unlike any seen before, not for a limited emergency, but for an indefinite period. Sulla then unleashed a horrifying campaign of terror through proscriptions, publicly posted lists of enemies of the state who could be killed on sight, with their property confiscated and rewards offered to their killers. Thousands of Romans, many of them wealthy equestrians or Marius's supporters, were brutally murdered. Sulla's goal was to eliminate all opposition and decisively restore the Senate's power, weakening the tribunes and popular assemblies. He retired peacefully in 79 BC, believing he had saved the Republic. But his actions, particularly the 2 marches on Rome and the widespread proscriptions, irrevocably damaged the Republic. They demonstrated that military power, not legal process or tradition, was now the ultimate arbiter of political control. The rule of law was often replaced by the rule of the sword and the terror of the hit list. The grim precedent set by the Greci brothers had escalated dramatically, paving the way for the utter collapse of republican norms and the onset of even more devastating civil wars in the decades to come. The very foundations of the Republic were cracking, revealing a deep, incurable rot. The sheer scale of Rome's expansion, from a city-state to a vast Mediterranean empire, brought with it not just wealth and glory, but also profound, destabilizing changes that the Republic's ancient institutions were simply not equipped to handle. The economic disparities between the super-rich and the desperate poor, fueled by slave labor and massive land acquisition, created a volatile social environment. The political system, once balanced by checks and balances, was increasingly polarized and prone to violence, with ambitious individuals bypassing traditional norms. And critically, the professionalization of the army under Marius, while making Rome militarily dominant, simultaneously transformed legions into instruments of personal power, loyal to their generals rather than to the abstract concept of the state. These factors, interwoven and mutually reinforcing, created a republic teetering on the brink, destined for the dramatic final struggles that would ultimately lead to its demise. The stage was set for the next act in Rome's epic and tragic drama. The dust from Sulla's bloody dictatorship had barely settled, and Rome, though exhausted, was far from healed. Sulla had returned power to the Senate, believing he had purged the Republic of its rebellious elements and set it back on a virtuous traditional course. But his brutal proscriptions, his unprecedented marches on Rome, and his blatant use of military force to achieve political ends had, in fact, irrevocably shattered the very foundations of republican law and custom he claimed to uphold. He had shown future generations of ambitious men the path to ultimate power, not through senatorial debate, but through the loyalty of legions. The underlying social and economic problems, the gaping chasm between rich and poor, the landless veterans, the discontented urban masses, remained unaddressed, festering beneath a fragile veneer of order. This wasn't a return to stability. It was a temporary, uneasy calm before an even greater storm. Into this volatile political vacuum stepped a new generation of ambitious, brilliant, and utterly ruthless men. They were the inheritors of a broken system, and they would play the game of power with a recklessness that would ultimately consume the Republic itself. Chief among them were Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, known to history as Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's wealthiest man, and a rising star, a young, intensely charismatic and deeply indebted aristocrat named Gaius Julius Caesar. Pompey the Great was, by all accounts, a military prodigy. He had earned his formidable reputation fighting for Sulla, then against a formidable rebel general, Sertorius, in Spain, in a long and grinding conflict. His star truly ascended, however, with 2 spectacular successes in the 60s BC. First, he was given extraordinary command to clear the Mediterranean of pirates, who were strangling Rome's vital grain supply. In a swift, methodical campaign, he achieved this impossible feat in a mere 3 months, securing Rome's trade routes and earning immense public gratitude. Next, he was dispatched to the east to finally defeat Mithridates VI of Pontus, a cunning and persistent enemy of Rome, who had waged war for decades. Pompey systematically dismantled Mithridates' kingdom, reorganized the entire eastern Mediterranean, creating new provinces like Syria and client states. Pompey was Rome's most popular and influential man, seemingly untouchable. He was the embodiment of military glory, a hero to the masses. Marcus Licinius Crassus, by contrast, wielded power through his colossal wealth. He was arguably the richest man in Rome, having famously profited from Sulla's proscriptions and shrewd real estate dealings, including, legend has it, buying up burning buildings cheaply and then deploying his private fire brigade to put them out. His financial network was immense, extending across the Republic. He was a shrewd politician, providing loans and favors to countless senators and aspiring politicians, binding them to him through debt and obligation. While he yearned for military glory to match Pompey's, his reputation had been built on his decisive, brutal crushing of the Spartacus slave revolt in 71 BC, crucifying thousands of rebellious slaves along the Appian Way as a grim warning. He wanted to be seen as more than just a rich man. He wanted the political and military prestige that came with it. And then there was Gaius Julius Caesar. In the early 60s BC, he was a rising but still junior figure, burdened by immense debt, but possessing an electrifying charisma, sharp political instincts, and an aristocratic lineage that stretched back to Aeneas himself, or so he claimed. Caesar distinguished himself early on through daring political maneuvering, lavish public games, funded by borrowed money, and eloquent speeches. He served as an aedile, a praetor, and then eventually secured the consulship, but he needed a way to truly launch himself into the upper echelons of power, to acquire the military command that was now the prerequisite for true influence in Rome. He saw the path clearly: control of a province and a loyal army. It was this shared yet ultimately competing ambition that led to the formation of the first triumvirate in 60 BC. This was not a formal governmental body recognized by law. It was a pragmatic, secret, and deeply cynical alliance between these three most powerful men: Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. They had a simple goal: to combine their immense influence, wealth, and military support, to bypass the obstructionist Senate and achieve their individual political goals. It was a gentleman's agreement, a backroom deal designed to cut through the Republican gridlock. Each member benefited immensely. Caesar, after his consulship, desperately needed a major military command to pay off his debts and build his own power base. Through the triumvirate's combined pressure, he secured the governorships of Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, Illyricum, and later Transalpine Gaul, southern France, for an unprecedented 5 years, with command of 4 legions.
This was his golden opportunity to acquire the military glory he craved.
Pompey, frustrated by the Senate's refusal to ratify his eastern settlements and provide land for his veterans, used the triumvirate to force through these measures. Crassus, in turn, secured favorable financial concessions for the wealthy publicani, tax collectors, and equestrians, a key part of his political base. For a few years, their combined influence utterly dominated Roman politics, effectively rendering the Senate powerless. But the inherent instability of such an alliance, built on individual ambition rather than shared ideology, was clear from the start. It was a power trio, but they were always jostling for the lead. Caesar's assignment to Gaul proved to be his grand stage. For nearly a decade, from 58 BC to 50 BC, he embarked on the conquest of Gaul. These campaigns were a masterclass in military brilliance, strategic audacity, and sheer, brutal efficiency. Caesar brought a vast, wild, and largely unconquered territory under Roman control, extending Rome's borders to the Atlantic Ocean and the Rhine River. His campaigns were meticulously documented in his own work, Commentaries on the Gallic War, a brilliant piece of propaganda that showcased his military genius, justified his actions to the Roman people, and kept his name constantly in the public eye. The scale of these operations was immense. Caesar's legions marched thousands of miles, built bridges over major rivers like the Rhine in mere days, a feat of engineering that astonished even the Gauls, and besieged countless fortified towns. He proved himself a tactical innovator, capable of rapid marches, audacious assaults, and brilliant siege warfare. The Gallic tribes, despite their individual bravery, were disunited and often succumbed to Roman military superiority and Caesar's cunning diplomacy that played them against each other. The campaigns culminated in the epic and desperate struggle against Vercingetorix, a charismatic chieftain who finally managed to unite many Gallic tribes against the Roman invaders. The decisive moment came at the siege of Alesia in 52 BC. Here, Caesar's engineering genius was on full display. He constructed a double line of fortifications, one inner wall to besiege Alesia itself, and another outer wall to protect his forces from a massive Gallic relief army. Trapped between two Roman walls, Vercingetorix's forces were eventually starved into submission, and the relief army decisively defeated. Vercingetorix famously surrendered himself to Caesar, offering himself as a sacrifice for his people. The victory at Alesia broke the back of Gallic resistance and cemented Caesar's reputation as a military genius of unparalleled skill. The impact of the Gallic conquest on Caesar's personal power was monumental. He amassed immense wealth from plunder, which he used to pay his soldiers handsomely and to fund lavish public works and games in Rome, further increasing his popularity among the masses. Crucially, he forged an unshakable bond with his veteran legions. They had fought alongside him for years, shared hardships, and tasted victory under his command. Their loyalty was now intensely personal, a formidable force that would define the coming civil wars. Caesar, once deeply in debt, was now one of the richest and most powerful men in the Republic, with an army utterly devoted to him. But while Caesar was conquering Gaul, the first triumvirate was slowly, inexorably falling apart. The first crack appeared with the death of Crassus in 53 BC. He had finally gotten his wish for a major military command, leading a massive Roman army against the Parthian Empire in the east. But at the Battle of Carrhae, his legions were utterly annihilated by the Parthian horse archers, and Crassus himself was killed. His death removed the financial and political glue that had held the alliance together, leaving only Caesar and Pompey, two colossal, equally ambitious figures, now locked in an inevitable rivalry for sole supremacy. The relationship between Caesar and Pompey, once allies, now steadily deteriorated into suspicion and open hostility. Pompey, increasingly uneasy with Caesar's meteoric rise, his vast wealth and the unwavering loyalty of his Gallic legions, began to distance himself from Caesar and align himself more closely with the conservative faction in the Senate, who also feared Caesar's immense power. The Senate, increasingly desperate to reassert its dwindling authority and terrified of Caesar's return with his veteran army, saw Pompey as their champion, their only hope against Caesar's perceived ambition for tyranny. They ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. This was a direct challenge, a thinly veiled trap designed to strip him of his power, prosecute him for alleged illegalities during his consulship, and end his political career. Caesar knew this. On January 10, 49 BC, faced with the ultimatum, he made the fateful, irreversible decision. Leading a single legion, the 13 Gemina, he crossed the Rubicon River, a small, insignificant stream that legally marked the boundary of his provincial command, beyond which a general was forbidden to lead an army. This act was an open, unambiguous declaration of war against the Senate and Pompey. As he led his troops across, he is famously said to have uttered the momentous words, "Alia jacta est," the die is cast. There was no turning back. Rome was plunged into another, even more devastating and global civil war. This conflict was brutal and widespread, tearing the Roman world apart. It was fought across Italy, Greece, Africa, and Spain, costing countless lives and disrupting every aspect of Roman society. Caesar's military genius, his legendary speed, celeritas, his audacity, and the unwavering loyalty of his battle-hardened veterans proved superior. He swiftly secured Italy, then pursued Pompey eastward. The decisive showdown came at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece in 48 BC. Though Pompey commanded a larger army, Caesar's tactical brilliance and the discipline of his legions carried the day. Pompey suffered a crushing defeat and fled to Egypt, seeking refuge with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. But rather than offering sanctuary, Ptolemy, hoping to curry favor with Caesar, had Pompey assassinated upon his arrival, presenting Caesar with his rival's head. Caesar was reportedly appalled by this betrayal. After further campaigns in Egypt, where he famously became involved with Queen Cleopatra VII, Africa, and Spain, defeating the last remnants of Pompey's supporters, Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Republic. Caesar then had himself declared Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. He held immense, unprecedented power, far exceeding that of Sulla. He was, in all but name, an absolute monarch, though he carefully avoided the hated title of king. During his brief period of supreme power, 45 to 44 BC, he implemented wide-ranging reforms aimed at bringing order and efficiency to a shattered republic. He reformed the confusing Roman calendar, creating the Julian calendar, which we still use today with minor modifications, alleviating debt, distributing land to veterans and the urban poor, initiating massive public works projects like new forums and temples, and reorganizing provincial administration to curb corruption. He also famously extended Roman citizenship to many in the provinces, aiming to integrate the empire more thoroughly and creating a broader base of support. However, his rapid accumulation of titles, his display of near-monarchical power like wearing purple robes, a royal color, and his seeming disregard for traditional republican norms deeply troubled many conservative senators and old aristocratic families. They feared he was destroying the very republic they held dear, that he was simply another king in waiting, and that Rome was doomed to despotism. They genuinely believed they were acting to save Rome's ancient liberties and avert tyranny. On the Ides of March 15, 44 BC, a conspiracy of around 60 senators, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, ironically men Caesar had pardoned and even promoted, assassinated Caesar in the Senate House at the Theatre of Pompey. They struck him down with daggers, a brutal public act of political violence, convinced they were performing a noble act of tyrannicide, restoring liberty and saving the Republic.
But in reality, their desperate, misguided act merely opened the floodgates to more chaos, more bloodshed, and even more destructive civil wars. They profoundly underestimated the power vacuum they created, the deep love and support Caesar still enjoyed among the common people and his veteran legions, and the fierce desire for stability and order after decades of strife. The common people, many of whom had benefited from Caesar's reforms and appreciated his charismatic leadership, mourned him as a national hero. His loyal veterans were furious and hungry for revenge, ready to follow any leader who promised them justice and reward. The assassins, far from being hailed as liberators, found themselves isolated and under threat. Caesar's assassination did not restore the Republic. It ignited another, even bloodier and more destructive round of civil wars. His adopted son and heir Octavian, a seemingly unassuming young man of only 18, but possessing a truly astonishing shrewdness, a chilling political acumen, and an uncanny ability to read the Roman political landscape, quickly emerged as a central figure in the tumultuous aftermath. He brilliantly outmaneuvered many older, more established politicians, including even Cicero, who initially underestimated him. Octavian shrewdly capitalized on the public's desire for vengeance for Caesar's death and their yearning for stability. He quickly formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC, with two of Caesar's most powerful and loyal supporters, Mark Antony, a seasoned general, charismatic orator, and Caesar's popular right-hand man, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, another powerful general and politician. This was a legal alliance, sanctioned by law, unlike the first, giving them immense power. This triumvirate immediately unleashed a brutal and systematic campaign of terror through proscriptions, publicly posted lists of enemies of the state who could be killed on sight, with their property confiscated and rewards offered to their killers. Thousands of Romans, including the orator Cicero, who had publicly denounced Antony, were brutally murdered in this chilling purge, far more extensive and ruthless than Sulla's, designed to eliminate all political opposition, consolidate their power, and fund their massive armies. The triumvirs then turned their attention to avenging Caesar's death. Their combined forces met the armies of the conspirators, Brutus and Cassius, at the Battle of Philippi in Macedonia in 42 BC. After 2 bloody engagements, Brutus and Cassius were decisively defeated and committed suicide, effectively ending the Republican cause and avenging Caesar's murder.
With the conspirators defeated, the triumvirs again divided the Roman world among themselves. But it was only a matter of time before their colossal ambitions clashed. Lepidus, lacking the military power and political skill of the other two, was soon marginalized and eventually stripped of most of his power by Octavian. The final decisive showdown was now inevitable, setting the stage for the last great civil war of the Republic, between Octavian, controlling the West, and Mark Antony, controlling the East. Mark Antony, a charismatic but often impulsive figure, had become deeply entangled with Queen Cleopatra VII of Egypt, the last active pharaoh of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Their alliance was both political and romantic. Antony, based in Egypt, was seen by many in Rome as having gone native, adopting Eastern customs, divorcing Octavian's sister, and seeming to prioritize Cleopatra and Egypt over Roman interests. This alliance was viewed with deep suspicion and outright hostility in Rome, where Octavian skillfully exploited Roman xenophobia and traditionalist fears. Octavian, a master of propaganda, shrewdly portrayed Antony as having abandoned traditional Roman values for an effeminate Eastern despotism under Cleopatra's sway, threatening Roman identity itself. The propaganda war between Octavian and Antony was fierce, personal, and devastatingly effective, painting Antony as a traitor to Rome. Their forces finally clashed at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, a decisive naval battle fought off the western coast of Greece. Octavian's brilliant admiral Agrippa commanded his fleet to victory against the combined navies of Antony and Cleopatra. Antony and Cleopatra's forces were utterly routed. They fled back to Egypt, their hopes shattered. Facing inevitable capture and humiliation in Octavian's triumphal parade, they both chose to commit suicide, Antony by falling on his sword, and Cleopatra, famously, by allowing an asp, a venomous snake, to bite her, thus avoiding the indignity of being paraded as a captive in Rome. With his rivals eliminated and Egypt, the last great Hellenistic kingdom, now annexed as a Roman province, Octavian was now the sole undisputed master of the entire Roman world. The civil wars, which had plagued Rome for decades, were finally over, but the cost had been immense. Countless lives lost, the economy devastated, and the very institutions of the Republic utterly broken. Octavian now stood at the precipice of a new era. He knew he could not repeat Caesar's mistake of openly seizing absolute power. The Roman people, weary of endless conflict and yearning for stability and peace above all else, were ready for a change, but they still clung to the idea of the Republic. Octavian, with his chilling pragmatism and political genius, would give them what they wanted, in a form they would accept, forever changing the course of Roman history.
The Republic was dead, not with a bang, but with the quiet, careful steps of a man who knew precisely how to wear the crown without being called a king. The stage was now set for the long, complex reign of Augustus, and the subsequent 200 years of the Pax Romana. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC wasn't just a naval victory. It was the final, thunderous clap of a long, agonizing storm of civil wars that had ravaged the Roman world for decades. With the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian stood alone as the undisputed master of Rome. But he was no fool. He understood the dangers of appearing too kingly, too autocratic, having witnessed his adoptive father, Julius Caesar, pay the ultimate price for seemingly grasping at absolute power. Octavian knew that the Roman people, though weary of conflict and desperate for stability, still held a deep-seated reverence for the traditions of the Republic, however broken they might be. His approach was a stroke of political genius, a masterpiece of subtle manipulation and careful image crafting. In 27 BC, in a move that historians still debate today, Octavian famously restored power to the Senate and the Roman people. He publicly offered to lay down his extraordinary powers, declaring the civil wars over and the Republic saved. Of course, the Senate, now filled with his supporters and fully aware of who commanded the loyalty of Rome's legions, gratefully refused his offer. Instead, they bestowed upon him new, unprecedented honors and titles. The most significant was Augustus, meaning revered one or majestic one, a title that conveyed divinity and unparalleled prestige. He also adopted the humble-sounding title of Princeps Civitatis, first citizen, subtly emphasizing his role as a leading citizen rather than a king or dictator. This meticulously crafted facade, known as the Principate, allowed him to hold supreme authority while maintaining the outward appearance of republican continuity. It was a brilliant, enduring illusion. Augustus did not invent new offices, but cleverly accumulated multiple existing republican powers. He held the Imperium Proconsulare Maius, giving him ultimate military command over all provincial governors and legions, making him the supreme commander of the entire army. He was granted Tribunicia Potestas, the power of a tribune, which gave him veto power over any assembly or senate decision, inviolability of person, and the right to propose laws. He also eventually became Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, cementing his religious authority. By concentrating these powers, usually dispersed among many magistrates, into his own hands, Augustus established a new, centralized form of government, laying the foundations for over 3 centuries of imperial rule. This ingenious system provided the stability Rome craved.
Augustus's reign, 27 BC to 14 AD, initiated the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, a period of unprecedented relative peace, stability, and prosperity that would last for over 200 years, from his accession to the death of Marcus Aurelius in 180 AD. It was not an era entirely free from conflict. Roman legions still fought on the frontiers, but within the vast borders of the empire, civil war largely ceased, and peace reigned. Augustus, a tireless and meticulous administrator, implemented wide-ranging reforms that transformed every aspect of Roman life. He reorganized the vast Roman army into a professional standing force of long-service soldiers, loyal directly to the emperor, ensuring disciplined control over Rome's military might. He established the Praetorian Guard, an elite unit stationed in Rome, nominally the emperor's bodyguard, but also a visible reminder of imperial power and, as history would show, often a kingmaker in later centuries. He reformed the sprawling imperial administration, creating a professional civil service run by loyal officials rather than political appointees, which greatly improved efficiency and reduced corruption in the provinces. He stabilized the chaotic Roman financial system with new tax policies and centralized treasury management, bringing much-needed order to the economy. He also embarked on a massive program of moral and religious legislation, aiming to restore what he saw as traditional Roman values, promoting marriage, discouraging adultery, and reviving old Roman cults and festivals. He famously boasted, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble," a testament to his monumental building program. He constructed new forums, temples, like the majestic temple of Mars Ultor, public baths, and theaters, transforming Rome into a dazzling imperial capital. These public works not only beautified the city, but also provided employment and a tangible sense of progress and stability to the common people. He also built or repaired vast networks of roads and established an efficient postal system, cursus publicus, facilitating rapid communication and trade across the empire. Life and society in the Roman Empire, under the Pax Romana, was a complex, vibrant, and diverse experience, vastly different depending on one's social status and geographical location. At the heart of it all was Rome, the majestic capital, a bustling metropolis that eventually swelled to over 1 million inhabitants, a feat of ancient urban planning. This was a city of monumental grandeur and stark contrasts. Vast aqueducts, engineering marvels, carried billions of liters of fresh, clean water daily from distant springs and mountains, supplying public fountains, private homes, and the ubiquitous public baths. These baths were far more than just places to get clean. They were vital social, economic, and hygienic centers, open to all classes. Romans would spend hours there, exercising in gymnasiums, soaking in hot, warm, and cold pools, getting massages, discussing politics, concluding business deals, and gossiping. They were the true community centers of the Roman world, accessible to rich and poor alike, though the rich might have private rooms or go at less crowded times. The city was adorned with grand forums, impressive temples, magnificent theaters, and vast circuses. The Colosseum, officially the Flavian Amphitheater, begun under Vespasian and completed by Titus, was the most iconic symbol of Roman power and popular entertainment. Here, gladiatorial contests, elaborate animal hunts involving exotic beasts from across the empire, and even simulated naval battles flooding the arena, captivated vast audiences. The Circus Maximus, an immense chariot racing arena, could hold hundreds of thousands of spectators, generating feverish excitement and intense rivalries between different racing factions. These spectacles, along with subsidized grain distributions, were powerful tools of social control, keeping the urban masses relatively content and distracted from political grievances. The policy of bread and circuses, panem et circenses. Daily life for most Romans revolved around the rhythm of work, family, and social engagement. Society was rigidly hierarchical, but with some mobility. At the top were the patricians, old aristocracy, and the equestrians, wealthy businessmen and landowners. Below them were the plebeians, the vast majority of free citizens, ranging from skilled artisans to the urban poor. Further down were freedmen, former slaves, who could often achieve considerable wealth, and at the bottom, the millions of slaves. The Roman family was a patriarchal unit, dominated by the paterfamilias, the oldest living male, who held immense legal authority over his household, including his wife and adult children, though this power diminished over time. Roman naming conventions were complex, typically involving a praenomen, given name, nomen, clan name, and cognomen, family branch name. Education, while not universal, was highly valued, especially for the elite, focusing on rhetoric, philosophy, and Greek. The Roman diet revolved around the Mediterranean staples: grain for bread and porridge, olives for oil, and grapes for wine, usually mixed with water. The wealthy enjoyed elaborate banquets with exotic foods, while the poor subsisted on simpler but often adequate fare. Slavery was an omnipresent, fundamental institution woven into every aspect of Roman economy and society. Millions of slaves, acquired through conquest, debt, or birth, performed every conceivable task. They toiled in vast agricultural estates, worked in mines under brutal conditions, served as domestic servants, tutors, doctors, administrators, and even highly skilled artisans. Their lives varied immensely, from the brutal existence of a mine slave to the relatively privileged life of a household slave who might earn their freedom, manumission, and become a freedman. The Roman economy was built on this foundation of exploited labor, fueling the leisure and prosperity of the elite. Perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of the Pax Romana was the extensive Romanization of the provinces. As the legions secured the vast territories, Roman law, Latin language, especially in the West, Roman-style architecture, temples, theaters, amphitheaters, public baths, forums, and Roman cultural practices spread throughout the conquered lands. Cities like Londinium, London, Lutetia, Paris, Lugdunum, Lyon, and Caesarea, Churchill, sprang up or were revitalized, becoming centers of Roman influence.
This created a relatively unified Greco-Roman cultural zone across the Mediterranean basin and much of Europe. While Rome exploited its provinces through taxation and resources, it also brought unprecedented peace, law, infrastructure, and a degree of social mobility. Many provincials adopted Roman customs, served in the army, and gradually gained citizenship, contributing to the empire's strength and diversity. Trade flourished, facilitated by safe roads and sea lanes, connecting distant regions and bringing immense wealth to the imperial center through the exchange of grain, wine, olive oil, pottery, metals, and exotic goods from as far away as India and China. The emperors who followed Augustus varied greatly in their character, competence, and effectiveness, forming a fascinating parade of personalities, some brilliant and benevolent, others deeply flawed and tyrannical. The first imperial dynasty after Augustus was the Julio-Claudian dynasty, 14 AD, 68 AD, named for the intermarriage of Augustus's Julian family and his wife Livia's Claudian family. Tiberius, 1437 AD, Augustus's stepson and chosen successor, inherited a vast and complex empire. He was a competent and cautious administrator, diligently managing the imperial finances and maintaining stability. However, he was also a reclusive, often paranoid figure, deeply unpopular with the Roman elite. His reign grew increasingly tyrannical towards its end as he retreated to the island of Capri, ruling through correspondence and unleashing purges against perceived enemies in Rome. His relationship with the Senate was often strained, marking a shift from Augustus's careful collaboration. Caligula, 37 to 41 AD, Tiberius's great-nephew, began his reign with immense popularity, but quickly descended into what ancient historians describe as madness and extravagance. Stories of his cruelty, megalomania, including attempts to deify himself while alive, and bizarre behavior, like making his horse a consul, are legion, though perhaps exaggerated by hostile sources. His brief but terrifying reign ended with his assassination by the Praetorian Guard, highlighting the growing power of this elite military unit in determining imperial succession. Claudius, 41 to 54 AD, Caligula's unlikely uncle, was brought to power by the Praetorian Guard after Caligula's death. He was physically awkward, somewhat deaf, and considered a scholarly recluse by his family. Yet he proved to be a surprisingly effective and diligent emperor. He oversaw crucial administrative reforms, expanded the bureaucracy, and was responsible for the significant conquest of Britain in 43 AD, adding a major new province to the empire. His reign, however, was also marked by court intrigues and the influence of powerful wives and freedmen, ultimately leading to his poisoning, likely by his last wife, Agrippina the Younger, to secure the succession for her son, Nero. Nero, 54 to 68 AD, Claudius's stepson, was the last of the Julio-Claudian emperors and perhaps the most infamous. His initial reign, guided by his tutor Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, showed promise. However, he gradually descended into tyranny, marked by matricide, killing his mother, Agrippina, obsession with the arts, singing, poetry, acting, which Romans found undignified for an emperor, and paranoia. The devastating Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD led to widespread suspicion that Nero himself had started it to clear land for his lavish new palace, the Domus Aurea, Golden House. This tragedy also led to the first major persecutions of Christians, whom Nero scapegoated for the fire, establishing a dangerous precedent for future imperial policy. His increasingly erratic behavior, lavish spending, and disregard for the Senate eventually led to a series of revolts across the empire, culminating in his forced suicide, uttering the famous words, "Qualis artifex perio," "What an artist dies in me." His death plunged Rome back into chaos. Nero's suicide in 68 AD ushered in the infamous Year of the Four Emperors, 69 AD, a brief but brutal civil war that exposed the fragility of the imperial system when no clear successor existed. 4 different generals, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, seized the throne through military force within a single year, highlighting the army's ultimate power in imperial succession and the dangers of a leaderless empire. This period of turmoil
finally ended with the victory of Vespasian. Vespasian, 69 to 79 AD, was a pragmatic, down-to-earth general from a modest background who emerged victorious from the civil war. He restored desperately needed stability after the chaos of the Julio-Claudians and the Year of Four Emperors. He was a shrewd fiscal manager, introducing new taxes and reforms to rebuild the depleted imperial treasury. He began the monumental construction of the Colosseum, officially the Flavian Amphitheatre, a grand gesture to appease the Roman populace and showcase imperial power, built on the site of Nero's former palace, symbolically returning the land to the people. His reign marked the beginning of the Flavian dynasty, 69 to 96 AD. Titus, 79 to 81 AD. Vespasian's popular son succeeded his father peacefully, a rare occurrence. His brief reign, though short, was marked by several significant events. He completed the Colosseum, presiding over its grand inauguration games. He also dealt with the devastating aftermath of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, which famously buried the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and a severe plague in Rome. Earlier, as a general under his father, he had famously commanded the Roman forces that brutally destroyed Jerusalem and its Second Temple in 70 AD, during the First Jewish-Roman War. A traumatic event for Jewish history. Domitian, 81 to 96 AD. Titus's younger brother succeeded him after Titus's unexpected death. His reign began competently, but he increasingly adopted an autocratic and suspicious style of rule, demanding to be addressed as Master and God, Dominus et Deus. His reliance on informers and a climate of fear led to widespread executions and ultimately his assassination by a conspiracy involving members of his own household and the Senate. His death was followed by a damnatio memoriae, where his name was erased from inscriptions and his statues destroyed, a symbolic attempt to blot him out of history. Domitian's assassination, however, did not plunge Rome back into civil war. Instead, it ushered in a period widely regarded as the pinnacle of Roman imperial rule, the era of the Five Good Emperors, 96 AD to 180 AD. This exceptional period was characterized by a crucial innovation in imperial succession. Rather than relying on the often problematic hereditary principle, these emperors chose their successors based on merit and ability, often adopting a capable general or administrator as their heir. Nerva, 96 to 98 AD, an elderly senator, was chosen by the Senate after Domitian's assassination, providing a brief but crucial period of stability. His most significant act was to adopt the highly respected military commander Trajan as his successor, setting the precedent for adoptive succession.
Trajan, 98 to 117 AD, the first emperor from outside Italy, born in Hispania, modern Spain, was a renowned military commander and an incredibly popular emperor. Under his rule, the Roman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent. He famously conquered Dacia, modern-day Romania, in 2 brutal wars, securing vast gold mines and resources, a feat commemorated by his magnificent Trajan's Column in Rome, a continuous spiral relief depicting his campaigns. He also launched ambitious campaigns against the Parthian Empire in the east, briefly conquering Mesopotamia and reaching the Persian Gulf. Beyond conquest, Trajan was a prolific builder, overseeing extensive public works across the empire, including roads, bridges, and his impressive forum and market in Rome. He was known for his just administration and his willingness to consult with the Senate. Hadrian, 117 to 138 AD, Trajan's adopted successor, famously chose to consolidate the empire rather than pursue further, costly conquests. He understood that the empire had reached its natural limits and needed to be secured and managed efficiently. He was known as the traveling emperor, spending much of his reign touring the provinces, inspecting garrisons, and addressing local issues firsthand. He focused on strengthening existing borders, famously building Hadrian's Wall across northern Britain as a defensive barrier against barbarian tribes. He was also a patron of the arts and philosophy, a talented architect believed to have designed the Pantheon's dome, and a reformer of Roman law. Antoninus Pius, 138 to 161 AD, succeeded Hadrian and enjoyed a remarkably long, peaceful, and prosperous reign, often considered one of the least turbulent and most stable in Roman history. He continued Hadrian's policies of consolidation and good governance, avoiding major wars and focusing on internal administration and public welfare. His reign is frequently cited as the zenith of the Pax Romana. Finally, Marcus Aurelius, 161 to 180 AD, the last of the 5 good emperors, was a philosopher-emperor, a devout follower of Stoic philosophy, whose personal writings, meditations, provide a powerful and moving insight into the burdens of imperial rule and the search for inner peace amidst external chaos. Despite his philosophical nature and desire for peace, he spent much of his reign fighting constant and brutal warfare on the northern frontiers, particularly against Germanic tribes, the Marcomannic Wars, along the Danube River. These wars were costly and presaged the escalating threats that would define the coming centuries. His death marked a critical turning point. He chose to name his biological son, Commodus, as his successor, breaking the precedent of adoptive succession and leading to a rapid decline in imperial stability.
At its height, the Roman Empire under the Pax Romana was a truly vast, awe-inspiring entity, encompassing nearly 2 million square miles and over 60 million people. It stretched from the misty shores of Britain in the west to the arid deserts of Mesopotamia in the east, from the cold forests of Germany to the hot sands of North Africa. It was an incredible tapestry of diverse peoples, languages, and cultures, all living under the pervasive unifying shadow of the Roman eagle. Its impressive infrastructure, centralized administration, and powerful military kept it remarkably stable and prosperous for centuries, an achievement unparalleled in Western history. But even in this golden age, the seeds of future challenges were quietly germinating. The immense cost of maintaining such vast borders, the reliance on a single individual for stability, and the burgeoning internal pressures that would eventually lead to the empire's dramatic transformation and decline. The eternal city felt eternal, but nothing, not even Rome, could last forever unchanged. As the reign of Marcus Aurelius drew to a close in 180 AD, a profound shift began to ripple through the vast Roman Empire. His death is often marked as the traditional end of the Pax Romana, that glorious 2-century span of relative peace and prosperity. It wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic explosion, but rather the quiet, almost imperceptible turning of a tide. The era of the 5 good emperors, chosen for their competence and adopted as heirs, had come to an end, replaced by the fateful decision to return to the principle of hereditary succession. Marcus Aurelius, despite his philosophical wisdom and heavy burdens, chose his biological son, Commodus, as his successor. It was a choice that would prove disastrous, signaling the beginning of a period of mounting instability. Commodus was everything his father was not. While Marcus Aurelius embodied stoic duty and intellectual rigor, Commodus was vain, tyrannical, and obsessed with personal glory, particularly in the gladiatorial arena. He neglected the serious business of imperial governance, preferring to fight as a gladiator in the Colosseum, a spectacle deeply embarrassing to the traditional Roman elite. His reign was marked by megalomania, paranoia, and a growing detachment from reality, leading to a corrupt and brutal administration that executed numerous senators and trusted advisors. His erratic behavior and cruelty eventually became intolerable, even to his closest allies. His reign ended, predictably, with his assassination by his inner circle in 192 AD, a conspiratorial act that plunged Rome back into the familiar, terrifying cycle of civil war and violent succession, reminiscent of the chaotic year of 4 emperors a century prior. The stable foundation built by Augustus and painstakingly maintained by the good emperors was cracking under the weight of an incompetent ruler. The assassination of Commodus triggered a new struggle for power, often called the Year of the 5 Emperors, 193 AD. From this chaos, a new dynasty emerged, the Severans, 193 to 235 AD. Its founder, Septimius Severus,
193 to 211 AD, was a formidable general from Leptis Magna in North Africa, a provincial who clawed his way to the top through military might. Severus was a pragmatic and ruthless ruler, a soldier through and through, who understood that true power now lay with the legions. He famously advised his sons, enrich the soldiers, scorn all other men. This philosophy defined his reign. He focused relentlessly on the welfare, pay, and loyalty of the army, granting them unprecedented privileges and increasing their numbers. While this ensured his own security, it came at an immense cost to the civilian economy, draining the imperial treasury and placing an ever-growing burden on the Roman populace through increased taxation. He transformed Rome into more of a military monarchy, less concerned with the Senate's prestige and more with the army's loyalty. His son Caracalla, 211 to 217 AD, continued this militaristic trend, but added a layer of profound cruelty and capriciousness. He murdered his own brother, Geta, to secure sole rule and launched brutal purges. Yet he also oversaw monumental building projects, like the magnificent baths of Caracalla in Rome, symbols of imperial grandeur. Caracalla's reign is most remembered for the pivotal Constitutio Antoniniana in 212 AD, an edict that granted Roman citizenship to virtually all free inhabitants of the Roman Empire. The motivations behind this sweeping decree are debated. Perhaps a genuine desire for unity, but more likely a cynical move to broaden the tax base and increase the number of eligible recruits for the army, as citizens paid certain taxes that non-citizens didn't. Whatever the reason, it was a massive social and fiscal change, profoundly impacting the identity of Roman citizenship, which had once been a privileged status. While it theoretically unified the empire, it also diluted the value of citizenship and introduced new administrative complexities. The Severan dynasty, despite its attempts at centralization and military focus, ultimately failed to provide lasting stability, plagued by internal power struggles, assassinations, and a growing sense of external pressure. This period of fragility was merely the prelude to the true nightmare, the crisis of the 3rd century, 235 AD to 284 AD. This was a half-century of unparalleled chaos, violence, and near collapse for the Roman Empire, a period so severe that many historians consider it the true turning point in Rome's long history, leading inevitably to its eventual decline in the West.
At the heart of this crisis was devastating political instability. This was the era of the barracks emperors, a grim testament to the army's absolute control over the imperial throne. Generals would seize power through military coups, reign for a few short months or years, only to be overthrown or assassinated by their own soldiers or rival claimants. In just 50 years, there were over 20 different emperors, or legitimate claimants, a dizzying, murderous carousel of power. Most died violently. Imagine the instability. The constant coups, counter-coups, and assassinations meant that the empire rarely had a stable hand at the helm for long. This created a profound sense of insecurity and cynicism among the populace. Loyalty shifted from the state to fleeting personal allegiances. The consequences of this ceaseless instability were catastrophic. Constant civil wars erupted across the empire as rival legions and generals battled for supremacy. These internal conflicts drained the empire's already strained resources, devastated vast swathes of its provinces, especially Italy, the Balkans, and Gaul, which became battlegrounds, disrupted vital trade routes, and profoundly undermined the central government's authority and legitimacy. Cities were sacked, farmlands laid waste, and the infrastructure of the Pax Romana began to decay. The empire was literally at war with itself, while its enemies gathered at the gates. This political turmoil was inextricably linked to a catastrophic economic collapse. Widespread and crippling hyperinflation ravaged the imperial economy. To pay their increasingly expensive and demanding armies, who now expected large bonuses for supporting new emperors, successive emperors resorted to desperate measures. The rampant debasement of coinage. They continuously reduced the precious metal content, silver and gold, of their coins, replacing it with cheaper base metals. What started as a trickle became a flood, until a silver coin barely contained any silver at all. This meant that the same coin was worth less and less with each successive debasement, causing prices to skyrocket at an insane rate. Farmers wouldn't sell their crops for worthless coins. Merchants refused to trade. This led to a complete breakdown of the monetary economy, forcing a return to inefficient bartering
and a system where taxes were often collected in kind, in goods like grain or oil, rather than currency. The decline of urban centers accelerated as trade dwindled, tax revenues plummeted, and public services collapsed. The increased burden of taxation fell on a shrinking, increasingly impoverished population, leading to widespread misery and social unrest. Compounding these internal woes were relentless and unprecedented military pressures from outside the empire. Barbarian incursions, which Marcus Aurelius had fought, now became a flood. Unlike earlier periods, these were often simultaneous, coordinated, and increasingly sophisticated attacks across multiple frontiers. Along the Danube frontier, powerful Germanic tribes like the Goths, including the Visigoths and Ostrogoths, pressed relentlessly into Roman territory, launching devastating raids deep into the Balkans and even Greece. Along the Rhine frontier, the Alemanni and Franks broke through, invading Gaul and even northern Italy. But perhaps the most dangerous threat came from the east, the formidable new Sassanid Persian Empire. This was not a loose confederation of tribes, but a highly organized, centralized, and aggressive rival, reclaiming the ancient power of the Persian Empire. The Sassanids launched major invasions, recapturing Roman territory in Mesopotamia and Syria. In an unprecedented humiliation for Rome, Emperor Valerian was actually captured by the Sassanid king Shapur I in 260 AD and died in captivity, a shocking blow to Roman prestige and morale. The sheer strain on the Roman army was immense. It was stretched thin, fighting on too many fronts simultaneously, often against powerful, well-organized foes. This continuous warfare also led to demographic decline. Repeated outbreaks of devastating plagues, such as the Plague of Cyprian in the mid-3rd century, ravaged the empire, causing immense loss of life. This depopulation led to severe labor shortages for agriculture and industry, and dramatically reduced the pool of potential recruits for the army, creating a vicious cycle of weakening defense. To make matters even worse, with the central government in Rome often weak or absent due to the constant change of emperors, parts of the empire actually broke away and formed their own breakaway empires. In the west, the Gallic Empire emerged, encompassing Gaul, Britain, and Spain, ruled by its own emperors who maintained Roman titles and structures but acted independently. In the east, the formidable Palmyrene Empire arose, led by the brilliant and ambitious Queen Zenobia. From her city of Palmyra in Syria, she challenged Roman authority, conquering Syria, Egypt, and parts of Asia Minor, effectively controlling a vast eastern domain. The legitimate Roman emperor in Italy often controlled little more than Italy itself, a stark illustration of how close the empire came to complete disintegration. It was into this abyss of chaos that Diocletian, 284 AD, 305 AD, stepped onto the stage. He was a shrewd, pragmatic, and utterly ruthless military commander. Diocletian was a man of immense will and iron discipline, determined to save the empire from its self-destruction. He understood that radical measures were needed, and he did not hesitate to implement them. His reign marked a shift from the informal principate to a more overt autocratic system, often referred to as the dominate, from dominus, master, a title emperors now openly embraced. Diocletian's most revolutionary reform was the establishment of the Tetrarchy, rule by 4, in 293 AD. He divided the vast Roman Empire into two administrative halves: the Western Roman Empire, with its capital initially in Milan, then Ravenna for better defense against barbarian incursions, and the Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital at Nicomedia in Asia Minor. He then appointed a co-emperor, an Augustus, to rule the other half, effectively splitting the supreme power. Each Augustus then appointed a junior emperor, a Caesar,
who served as their designated successor and helped govern a portion of their half. The goals of the tetrarchy were clear: to improve local governance and defense by having emperors closer to the frontiers, and to ensure orderly, peaceful succession, preventing civil wars by clearly designating heirs. While it did bring a period of stability, it also solidified the eventual permanent political and cultural split of the empire into distinct halves. Diocletian also implemented sweeping administrative reforms. He further divided large provinces into smaller, more manageable units, significantly increasing the number of governors. This created a larger, more centralized and hierarchical bureaucracy, which improved imperial control over the vast territories. However, it also came at a steep cost, requiring a vast number of new officials and increasing administrative expenses. His economic reforms were equally drastic, though often unpopular. To combat hyperinflation and ensure stable tax revenues, he attempted to control prices and wages through the Edict on Maximum Prices, 301 AD. This edict, which set fixed prices for thousands of goods and services, largely failed due to the realities of market forces, leading to black markets and shortages, but it showed the emperor's determination to impose order. More effectively, he reformed the tax system, making taxes payable increasingly in kind, in agricultural goods or services, rather than depreciated coinage, ensuring a direct supply chain for the army. He also instituted policies that made certain professions hereditary. Sons had to follow their fathers into trades, whether they were farmers, coloni, bakers, or soldiers. This was an attempt to stabilize the economy and ensure a steady labor supply, but it severely limited social mobility and individual freedom.
In terms of the military, Diocletian dramatically increased the size of the army, recognizing the immense pressure on the frontiers. He reorganized it, distinguishing between limitanei, frontier garrisons, static defensive forces, and highly mobile comitatenses, mobile field armies, rapid reaction forces. This increased militarization permeated Roman society, as more resources and manpower were diverted to defense. Finally, Diocletian launched the last and most severe imperial attempt to eradicate Christianity, the Great Persecution, 303 to 311 AD. He viewed the Christians' refusal to participate in the imperial cult and traditional Roman religious practices as a threat to state unity and divine favor, especially in a time of crisis. This persecution involved widespread arrests, imprisonment, torture, executions, and the destruction of churches and Christian texts. However, despite its brutality, it ultimately failed to crush Christianity. Instead, it arguably strengthened the resolve of many Christians and highlighted their resilience, leading to its eventual triumph. Diocletian retired peacefully in 305 AD, a truly rare act for a Roman emperor, believing he had successfully restored order and stability. However, his carefully constructed tetrarchy almost immediately broke down, leading to another series of civil wars. From this tumultuous period, one figure emerged to profoundly reshape the Roman world: Constantine the Great, 306 AD to 337 AD. Constantine's rise to power was complex and violent, marked by numerous battles against rival claimants to the imperial throne. The pivotal moment came at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge outside Rome in 312 AD. Before this decisive battle, Constantine famously experienced a vision, reportedly seeing a Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, the first two letters of Christ in Greek, in the sky, or in a dream, accompanied by the words "in hoc signo vinces," in this sign, conquer, attributing his subsequent victory over his rival Maxentius to the Christian god. Constantine began his profound shift towards Christianity. His conversion to Christianity was a monumental event, altering the course of Western history. While historians debate the sincerity of his conversion, whether it was genuine faith, political expediency, or a combination of both, its impact was undeniable. The following year, in 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan with his co-emperor Licinius. This groundbreaking edict formally legalized Christianity throughout the Roman Empire and granted religious tolerance to all faiths, effectively ending centuries of sporadic and often brutal persecutions against Christians. From being a persecuted minority, Christianity rapidly gained imperial favor, patronage, and influence, beginning its ascent to becoming the dominant religion of the Roman world.
Constantine's other monumental decision was the founding of a grand new capital city, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, built on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. Dedicated in 330 AD, this new Rome was a strategic masterpiece. Its location on the Bosporus offered superb natural defenses, easy access to vital trade routes between east and west, and proximity to the threatened Danubian and Persian frontiers. Unlike Rome, which was steeped in pagan tradition and symbols, Constantinople was explicitly founded as a Christian capital, adorned with churches rather than pagan temples. This act profoundly shifted the center of gravity of the Roman Empire eastward, away from the increasingly vulnerable and impoverished West. Constantine's reign marked a definitive transformation of the Roman Empire. He completed the work of Diocletian in establishing a more autocratic, centralized imperial system, moving further away from the vestiges of the Republic. But more profoundly, he began the process of integrating Christianity into the very fabric of the state, paving the way for its dominance and forever linking the destiny of the Roman Empire with that of the Christian Church. The crisis of the 3rd century had nearly destroyed Rome, but it had also, ironically, forced radical changes that allowed the empire to survive, albeit in a new, transformed guise, setting the stage for the distinct futures of its western and eastern halves. The stage was now set for the final, slow unraveling of the West, and the enduring survival of the East. The radical reforms of Diocletian and the transformative reign of Constantine the Great had pulled the Roman Empire back from the brink of total collapse during the terrifying crisis of the 3rd century. New structures had been put in place, a new capital had risen in the East, and a new religion, Christianity, was rapidly gaining imperial favor. But these changes, while breathing new life into the empire, also cemented its fundamental division. Constantine's successors continued to grapple with the immense challenges of governance, defense, and maintaining unity across a vast and diverse realm. A pivotal moment for the empire's destiny arrived with the reign of Theodosius I, 379–395 AD. Theodosius was a powerful emperor, a last strong hand to rule over both East and West. He took the definitive step of making Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire in 380 AD, issuing decrees that outlawed pagan worship and closed ancient temples. This profoundly reshaped the spiritual landscape of the empire, unifying it under one faith, but also cementing the demise of the traditional Roman polytheistic religious practices that had existed for centuries. Upon his death in 395 AD, Theodosius made a fateful decision that would prove irreversible. He formally divided the empire between his two young sons, Arcadius receiving the east and Honorius receiving the west. While in theory it was still a single Roman empire, sharing laws and a common heritage, this administrative division rapidly hardened into a permanent political, economic, and even cultural split. The two halves would increasingly diverge, becoming two distinct entities with profoundly different destinies. The growing divergence between East and West became stark. The Eastern Roman Empire, soon to be known as the Byzantine Empire, benefited from a richer, more urbanized economy, shorter and more defensible borders, and a more centralized government based in the vibrant new capital of Constantinople. Greek was the dominant language, and its Christian traditions leaned towards orthodoxy. The Western Roman Empire, by contrast, was largely Latin-speaking, predominantly rural, and increasingly vulnerable. Its economy was weaker, its cities shrinking, and its vast land borders constantly under pressure. This economic and military imbalance meant the West would bear the brunt of the escalating storm of barbarian invasions, a relentless tide that would ultimately overwhelm it. This era, spanning the late 4th and 5th centuries, was defined by escalating barbarian invasions in the West, a truly relentless and overwhelming tide of migratory peoples. These weren't always coordinated invasions driven by conquest. Often they were massive, desperate migrations of entire peoples fleeing an even more terrifying threat from the east: the Huns. The Huns, fierce nomadic horsemen from Central Asia, swept westward into Europe, driving wave after wave of Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals, Suebi, Alans, Burgundians, etc., before them, pushing them into the Roman Empire in a catastrophic domino effect. The story of the Visigoths vividly illustrates this desperate situation. Fleeing the terrifying Hunnic advance, the Visigoths, a large Germanic tribe, sought refuge within the Roman Empire, crossing the Danube in 376 AD. Rome, desperately short of manpower, agreed to let them settle. However, corrupt and incompetent Roman officials brutally mistreated them. They extorted money, denied promised food supplies, and even forced them to sell their children into slavery for a scrap of bread. This appalling treatment, combined with Roman arrogance and broken promises, ignited a desperate Visigothic revolt. This culminated in the catastrophic Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD. Here, the Visigothic cavalry utterly annihilated a large Roman field army, and Emperor Valens himself was killed in battle. It was a watershed moment, a truly devastating blow that shattered the myth of Roman military invincibility and demonstrated that barbarian armies could not only defeat but utterly destroy a major Roman force on Roman soil. It opened the Balkans to further incursions and proved that Rome could no longer rely on its traditional military supremacy. The Visigoths, now a powerful mobile force within the empire, continued to roam, demanding tribute and land. Their charismatic leader, Alaric, after years of negotiation and conflict with the imperial government, finally took the unthinkable step. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome itself. While Rome was no longer the political capital of the Western Empire, that had moved to Ravenna, which was more defensible, the symbolic impact was profound and devastating. For 3 days, Alaric's Goths plundered the city, though they reportedly spared churches and avoided wholesale slaughter. Nevertheless, the event sent shockwaves of disbelief and despair throughout the entire Roman world. For over 800 years since the Gauls had briefly sacked it in the early Republic, Rome had been impregnable, the eternal city. Its fall was seen by many, both pagan and Christian, as a sign of divine disfavor, shaking the very foundations of Roman identity and belief. Figures like St. Augustine would write his monumental work City of God in response to this traumatic event, attempting to explain it in Christian terms. The invasions continued relentlessly. In 429 AD, another Germanic tribe, the Vandals, crossed from Spain into Roman North Africa, swiftly conquering the vital provinces that served as the breadbasket of the Western Empire. This was a catastrophic blow as it cut off crucial grain supplies and immense tax revenue, crippling the Western government's ability to feed its cities, pay its armies, and fund its administration. The Vandals, establishing a powerful kingdom with a formidable navy, continued to plague Rome. In 455 AD, they launched a second, even more thorough sack of Rome, stripping it of its remaining wealth and treasures. Meanwhile, the terrifying shadow of the Huns still loomed. Their fearsome leader Attila, known as the Scourge of God, swept through Gaul and Italy in the mid-5th century, leaving a trail of utter destruction in his wake. His advance was finally checked at the Battle of the Catalanian Plains in Gaul in 451 AD, where a desperate and unlikely alliance of Romans, led by the general Aetius, and Visigoths, led by their king Theodoric, who died in the battle, managed to stop Attila's advance. This was one of the last major Roman victories in the West, a testament to the desperate measures needed to survive.
Attila then turned his attention to Italy, but famously turned back from Rome itself after a meeting with Pope Leo I, possibly due to a combination of diplomacy, plague in his army, and logistical challenges.
Beneath the onslaught of these external invasions, the internal weaknesses and transformations in the Western Roman Empire became increasingly stark and debilitating. The economic decline that began in the 3rd century only deepened. Hyperinflation continued to plague attempts at a monetary economy, forcing a widespread return to inefficient barter systems. Cities, once vibrant centers of trade and culture, suffered massive deurbanization. Many shrank dramatically, their populations dwindling, public services like aqueducts and baths falling into disrepair as local governments could no longer afford to maintain them. Trade routes became increasingly unsafe, further strangling commerce. Society became more ruralized, with people seeking protection and subsistence in fortified villas or becoming tied to the land as coloni, tenant farmers, gradually losing their freedoms. This period also saw severe depopulation. Recurrent plagues, chronic warfare, and widespread famine took a devastating toll on the population, leading to a significant reduction in available manpower for the army, the tax base, and the essential labor force. Fewer people meant less production, less tax revenue, and fewer soldiers, creating a vicious cycle of decline. The decline in military effectiveness was paramount. While individual units or generals could still achieve victories, the Roman army as a whole suffered from low morale, insufficient training due to lack of funds, and an ever-increasing reliance on barbarian foederati, allied mercenary troops. These Germanic warriors, often settled within Roman territory in exchange for military service, had their own leaders and their own tribal loyalties, which often superseded their allegiance to the distant Roman emperor. This barbarization of the army meant that the empire's primary defense force was increasingly composed of non-Romans, and top military commanders were often German strongmen, like Stilicho, Ricimer, and Odoacer, who wielded the real power, making the emperors mere puppets. Political instability in the West continued almost unabated. A rapid succession of weak, short-lived, and often child emperors sat on the throne, with little actual authority. They were controlled by these powerful barbarian generals, the true power brokers behind the scenes. The constant court intrigues, assassinations, and deposition of emperors further crippled any semblance of central authority or long-term planning. Finally, there was a profound loss of Roman identity and civic virtue. As the central government weakened and external threats mounted, citizens became increasingly disenfranchised and impoverished. Their loyalty shifted from a distant, ineffective imperial government to local strongmen, powerful landowners, or even the barbarian chiefs who could offer immediate protection and food. The traditional Roman values of public service, patriotism, and devotion to the state slowly eroded as people simply tried to survive. The Roman way of life became increasingly difficult to sustain outside of a few isolated strongholds, as classical education declined and local customs reasserted themselves. The final act of the Western Roman Empire came in 476 AD. By this point, the Western emperors were little more than figureheads, holding symbolic power over a shrinking domain. The last emperor to reign from Rome was a young boy named Romulus Augustulus. His name itself is steeped in poignant irony, combining the name of Rome's legendary founder and its first great emperor, Augustus, but in a diminutive form, signifying how far the once mighty empire had shrunk. He was effectively a puppet of his father Orestes, a former secretary to Attila the Hun. In 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer, leading a coalition of barbarian foederati who demanded land in Italy, deposed Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer's actions were significant. He did not himself take the title of emperor, nor did he seek to destroy Roman civilization. Instead, in a symbolically potent act, he sent the imperial regalia, the crown, the purple robes, the symbols of ultimate imperial power, back to the Eastern Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. This effectively acknowledged the Eastern Emperor as the sole legitimate Roman ruler, and established Odoacer as the King of Italy,
ruling under the nominal authority of Constantinople. This moment is conventionally, though somewhat arbitrarily, considered the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But it's crucial to understand that the fall wasn't a sudden, dramatic collapse or a single decisive battle. It was a gradual, complex, and protracted process, a culmination of centuries of interacting forces: chronic economic decline, crippling inflation, political instability, military overstretch, rampant corruption, internal social divisions, demographic decline due to disease and war, and relentless external pressures from barbarian migrations and invasions. The Roman Empire in the West didn't simply vanish overnight. It slowly transformed, fragmented, and decentralized. Its structures gradually replaced by smaller, less organized, often short-lived Germanic kingdoms. Much of Roman culture and infrastructure simply decayed or was abandoned. But pockets of Romanization persisted, influencing the new rulers. Roman citizens continued to live under new kings, gradually adapting.
What remained, however, was the vibrant, enduring Eastern Roman Empire, also known to modern historians as the Byzantine Empire, with its formidable capital at Constantinople. This empire, with its richer, more dynamic economy, more centralized and effective government, stronger defensive borders, and a deep Hellenistic cultural base, continued to thrive for another 1,000 years. For as long as the Western Empire had existed, it fiercely guarded and preserved Roman law, most famously through Emperor Justinian's monumental Code of Roman Law, which codified centuries of Roman jurisprudence, Greek philosophy, Christian theology, Orthodox Christianity, and classical learning during the period that would become the European Dark Ages in the West. It served as a vital bulwark against invasions from the East, Persians, Arabs, Turks, acting as a beacon of civilization. Its unique blend of Roman political structure, Greek language and culture, and Eastern Christian influences made it both Roman and distinctly its own. The Roman Empire didn't truly fall in 476 AD for those in the East. It simply continued, transformed. And so, we arrive at the profound, indelible legacy of Rome, a presence that continues to shape our world in countless ways, even after the political entity of the Western Empire ceased to exist. Rome's shadow is long and deep, extending into every facet of our modern lives. First and foremost, there is Roman law. Its principles of justice, due process, precedent, the idea of a universal law applicable to all citizens, and the concept of codified law, from the 12 Tables to Justinian's Code, form the fundamental bedrock of Western legal systems. The civil law tradition, predominant in continental Europe, directly descends from Roman law, and even common law systems like those in Britain and the United States draw deeply from Roman legal thought, influencing our understanding of rights, property, and governance. Then there is language. Latin, the language of Rome, didn't simply disappear. It evolved and transformed into the beautiful Romance languages we know today. French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, spoken by hundreds of millions worldwide. Furthermore, Latin had an immense foundational influence on English vocabulary and grammar. Up to 60% of English words have Latin roots, especially in complex academic, legal, and scientific contexts. Our very alphabet is Roman. In architecture and engineering, Rome's impact is timeless. The enduring power of the arch, the majestic dome as seen in the Pantheon, and the revolutionary use of concrete, a Roman invention, allowed them to build structures of unprecedented scale and durability. Their vast networks of roads, some still in use, complex aqueducts that brought water to cities, sophisticated public baths, sturdy bridges, and systematic urban planning, grid layouts, forums, continue to inspire and shape modern infrastructure and city design.
In terms of government and politics, Rome bequeathed to us fundamental concepts: the idea of a republic, a senate,
the rights and duties of a citizen, and the very notion of a vast unified empire are all deeply rooted in Roman experience. Their sophisticated administrative and bureaucratic structures, the idea of a civil service, departments responsible for specific functions, influenced later European states and modern governance. Their military theory and organization remain a subject of study. The Roman legion, with its discipline, logistical prowess, engineering capabilities, and adaptability, served as a model for military organization and strategy for centuries. In literature and philosophy, Rome played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting classical Greek knowledge. Roman writers like Virgil, the Aeneid, Cicero, oratory and philosophy, Seneca, Stoicism, Livy, history, and Tacitus, history and biting social commentary, produced works that continue to influence countless writers, thinkers, and artists. Roman literary forms like satire were groundbreaking, and finally, Christianity. The Roman Empire, which initially persecuted Christians, ultimately became the vehicle for its global spread. The establishment of Rome as the seat of the papacy and Constantinople as the center of the Orthodox Church profoundly shaped European religious identity, institutions, and values. The story of Rome, therefore, is not just a tale of ancient empires, it's a living, breathing narrative, a complex tapestry of human experience, ambition, and struggle. It serves as a powerful mirror for our own times, offering profound lessons. It teaches us about the dangers of internal division, the corrosive effects of economic inequality, the perils of political corruption, the challenges of military overreach, and the ultimate fragility of even the greatest achievements. It reminds us that external threats, while devastating, often exploit deeper pre-existing internal weaknesses. The cyclical nature of rise and fall, of transformation and adaptation, is evident throughout Rome's millennia-long journey, offering enduring insights into the forces that build and dismantle civilizations. As the echoes of Rome's triumphs and tragedies, its ingenuity and its eventual unraveling settle gently in your mind, let this grand narrative carry you away to a night of profound, peaceful rest. Its story is a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit, a civilization that, even in its ashes, continued to shape the world we inhabit today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the epic story of the Roman Empire and are ready for more tales to lull you into a perfect sleep, make sure to check out our next video. Take care and good night.